Hi and welcome to the Unquendor Guitars workshop. My name is Daniel and this is going to be a Q&A video in which I answer as many questions as possible you guys sent to me on my previous video and on a post I did on my community page. To be honest, I didn't expect to receive so many questions. I think I got over 40 questions. There are more than 10 pages of questions you guys submitted, and I'm going to try and do my best to answer as many as I can in this video, but some questions were so in-depth they deserve a video on their own. So if I don't come to answer your question in this video, keep a lookout on my channel, because there's a high chance I will make a separate video on your question. So without further ado, let's dive straight in and answer a lot of these questions. So the first question is sent in by Reprisal Within. Here's a question for a Q&A. On average, how many guitars do you build per year, and do you have plans to expand and scale up production, or would that diminish the craftsmanship? On average, I build 4 to 5 guitars a year, and as I'm building guitars next to a full-time day job, I just can't spend any more time here in the workshop. I almost spent all my spare time in the workshop already. So yeah, if the sales of my guitars would pick up and I get an income from Unquendor Guitars, which at the moment is not the case, I can work less for my day job and spend more time here in the workshop, and I think it will increase the craftsmanship and quality of my guitars, because I can spend more time on it, and more time spent on a certain skill, and the more repetitive you repeat and practice that skill, the better you become at it. So yeah, I hope this answered your question. Next question is very similar. It's by Dawn Psy. I would like to know the plans to extend your trademark Unquendor Guitars beyond YouTube content, considering new products or maybe sell guitar kit. Is it something you could consider, as not everybody can buy a finished guitar made by the best? Well, thank you very much. Yes, I do have plans if time and money permits. Like I said, Unquendor Guitars doesn't generate an income for me at the moment, so I don't have any time and funds to expand Unquendor Guitars, unfortunately. But yeah, I have plans to do so. About making kit guitars. Making kit guitars would require me to get into CNC, because making a kit guitar or a guitar kit by hand would make it, I think, too expensive for what it is. There's a lot of time and effort still involved in making a kit guitar, and it would make them almost as expensive as the finished instrument. So at the moment, sorry, no kit guitars, but I hope this answered your question. The next question is by Reality Studios Custom Shop. Hi Daniel, my question would be, given your attention to detail and the quality of your work, what's the worst mistake or learning experience on your point of view you've made since you start building guitars? I have perhaps been very lucky not to have made too many fatal mistakes ruining a guitar or wasting parts, except from one fretboard, which I wanted to avoid a certain section, and I thought I calculated the positions for the frets correctly, and I started cutting at the 24th fret, and when I was near the 5th fret I realized I was running out of fretboard, and that was one mistake I couldn't fix, because I just ran out of fretboard to cut fret slots in, so I had to scrap that fretboard. Another mistake I made, one I will never repeat again, is attaching templates with double-sided tape. I attached the templates for the neck pocket with double-sided tape, and I started routing, and when the neck pocket was done, it was too wide because the templates shifted a little, making the neck pocket too wide. Luckily, I was able to fix it by adding a bit of veneer on the inside of the neck pocket, making it nice and snug again. But yeah, that are two mistakes I made that were a bit stressful at the moment, but it all worked out perfectly, except for the one fretboard I had to scrap. So yeah, those are my biggest mistakes. Owen Kelly asked me, Q&A, your GGBO 2021 instrument is a work of art. Well, thank you very much. If someone were to order a similar guitar from you, what would an approximate price be? Yeah, this is something I, well, not struggle with, but I don't like. I don't like giving out prices here on YouTube or on any social media. If you like to get a quotation or ask me about pricing, yeah, please drop me an email or send me a message via my website and I will respond to you. For all my stock guitars that are on sale on my website, you can visit the details page on any specific guitar that's up for sale, and all the way at the bottom there's a price for you. So I hope this answered your question. The next question is from Louis Kerkhoven. Hi, I'm Louis, 17 years old and really into guitars. Great thing. Next year I'm going to study instrument building in Ghent. I want to make guitar building my hobby and maybe later my job. I made my first guitar as a thesis on my last year and that got the ball rolling. Do you have any tips or advice for someone who wants to start building guitars professionally? I love your videos. I've already learned a lot. Keep up the good work. Well, Louis, thank you very much. And I think, in my opinion, and I'm not a professional, but the difference between a professional and an amateur is not necessarily in how much money they make from what they're doing. Being a professional is all about mindset, in my opinion. So keep a professional mindset in everything you're doing regarding guitar building and everything surrounding that, from starting your study through rolling out of school and setting up your business. It's all in the attention to details others take for granted, like designing your website, business cards, your guitars, but also customer service and customer contact. So yeah, treat everything you're doing like it is a full-time business. That would be my advice. I would also recommend you getting a book from Leo Lospenado. It's called Electric Guitar and Bass Making and Marketing. There's a great chapter in that book regarding the difference between being an amateur hobbyist and a professional. So I recommend you getting that book, and it will also be useful, presumably, for your study. So I hope that answered your question. Rob Marmaduke also sent me a question. Tips on beard trimming, perhaps? Yes, please? I'm not good at beard trimming. Cora 3 custom guitars. One must go. Which is it? Coffee, beer, 80s hair metal, or fresh fish? Well, it can't be coffee, obviously. Beer, although I don't drink that much beer, it's rather nice to do so. 80s hair metal or fresh fish, and presumably cooked fresh fish, because my fish are going nowhere. So tough choice between 80s hair metal and eating fresh fish, but unfortunately 80s hair metal has to go. Guranga 32. How many years ago did you make your first guitar and how many have you made in total to date? And after how many builds were you comfortable with the quality of the instrument? Well, I started building guitars in 2017 and up until this point I've made 15 guitars. And for the being comfortable with the quality, I hope it will be the next one, to be honest. A question that came in from Josh Maybauer is favorite non-custom guitar, Strat, Les Paul, etc. Well, my favorite non-self-made or custom guitar might be almost as rare, and that's my Westone X390 Deluxe Pantera in Caspian Blue. And as far as I'm aware and as far as my research goes, There are only 16 ever made of this guitar model in this color, and mine even is an exception. I know there are 2 others I know of that have a Bandmaster Deluxe tremolo system instead of the Kahler tremolo system that these guitars were advertised with in the catalog. So yeah, probably just a rare guitar as my own. Made Unquendor Guitars, but I really love this guitar. I bought this guitar when I was 15 or 16 years old, and I worked the entire year to be able to afford this guitar, and once I've bought this guitar I never bought another guitar. I love it that much. So I hope this answers your question. A question that came in from Dave Burek. Would you ever make an inlay with the false binding on the neck or even the headstock, the way you do with the body? I find this design detail to be most amazing. Thank you. Well, as a matter of fact, I have already done that once, or at least on the headstock. This is the very first Unquendor guitar ever made, and you can see it had a slightly different design at the time, but it has the inlaid headstock veneer on the top. Doing the false binding alongside the neck, I don't think it would look very good, and it would be very hard to do, to get everything to match up exactly, and taking the thickness of the fretboard in consideration in regards to the truss rods installment and such. So I think it would be more of a pain to do than it's worth doing. When it comes to the headstock veneer, these days I mostly use laminated necks, and I found that doing an inlaid headstock veneer on a laminated neck gives a bit of a weird effect with the striping of the laminate being visible in the false binding. It just didn't look right most of the time, so that's why I stopped doing the inlaid headstock veneer and just do a headstock veneer like everyone else. So, but yeah, I've done it, and maybe I'll do it in the future more when I don't have a laminated neck, for example. But it's very well possible to also inlay the headstock veneer into the headstock. Guy All Knowing also sent in a question. I got a few great tips and tricks from your videos, so thank you. Well, you're welcome. Is there any type of guitar or building technique you haven't attempted yet, or are too anxious to try out at the moment? Maybe something you've always wanted to try on a build? Yeah, there is. And we go back to my Westone Pantera. Something I would really love to try one day is to make a full curved body. I hope I don't hit anything. As you can see, this entire guitar body is curved. There's no flat section on the entire guitar. There's curves everywhere. Yeah, maybe the headstock is flat, but that's about it. Everything is rounded over. And I would really try to make maybe even a tribute to this guitar one day, with a similar neck body transition and a similar carved body with also the concave or convex back of the guitar. It's really comfortable to play. So yeah, something similar like this I would really like to try one day. So yeah, maybe, who knows, this year or in the beginning of next year we get around to building maybe a tribute to this guitar. Jay Tisver sent in a question. Have you or can you build a fretless 6-string guitar, and what would be the cons and pros? Well, I haven't built a fretless 6-string, but I could if I choose to do so. But in my opinion it would be more of a novelty guitar than anything else. Pros. The pros might be that you don't have to do any fret work. Saves a bit of time, but I think there's a lot more cons when it comes to commercially building guitars. I think there's no or very little demand for fretless 6-string, so it would most likely be a guitar that's left on the wall for the rest of its life. It won't sell, you can't do anything with it if you're not building it for yourself. So yeah, I could build one, but I most likely never would unless I'm commissioned to do so. Another question came in from Reprisal Within. Could you explain why fret slots are cut with a slot saw by hand and why it can't be done with something like a miter saw? Fret slots are also being cut using table saws, Dremels, radial saws and a variety of other power tools. The problem often is the availability of suitable saw blades with a small enough curve to hold your frets. I know, for example, Stu Mac has a special saw blade for table saws with a 0.5 millimeter curve for your fret slots, but other than that, maybe Proxen has some. So yeah, that's the biggest issue, the availability of the saw blades, and that might also depend on where you're from. So if you can find a suitable saw blades to cut the fret slots and you take the time to make jigs for your table saw or your radial saw or whatever, you can perfectly well cut your fret slots with a power tool. Alright, Mr. CN diameter 55, or Mr. Code, unpronounceable last part of that name. I rarely see any builders making extended range. Would you ever build a 7 or 8 string in the future? It would be a learning experience for me as well. I want to build a guitar soon. Alright, maybe I will at some point build a 7 or an 8 string, but most likely only when commissioned. Like I said in a previous answer, at the moment when I'm building a guitar that's not commissioned, I build it to go on sale as stock, and if that guitar doesn't sell for any reason, I want to be able to use it myself, and I don't play any 7 or 8 string guitars and I have no intention to do so. So until that changes, and maybe until maybe that might change in the future and I build a 7 string for myself, or if I get commissioned to build a 7 string, I will build a 7 string, but until that happens, I most likely won't build a 7 or an 8 string guitar. Michael Keeley also sent in a question. When designing a non-standard guitar body like your designs, what aspects do you have to consider in order to have a usable finished product? Well, it depends if you're building a guitar for yourself or if you're trying to sell and market your guitars. When building for yourself, you can do whatever you like, and when trying to sell your guitars, my idea is keep the shape within reason. Although pointy guitars can be very cool, don't overdo it. It might hinder the playability and the aesthetics of the overall guitar. Yeah, it's a bit of a difficult question. There are some pointers that I keep in mind when designing my guitars, and that's mostly the usability of a guitar. How does it sit on my lap when I'm playing the guitar while sitting down, and how does it look and how does it sit when I play it standing up? Does it have a neck dive, for example, or can I get around the body shape with my arm? For example, if you have an Explorer type with a big point sticking out here, it can be hard to reach over or get in the way of your playing. So that are some things I keep in mind. Most likely the playability of a guitar in different positions. Sitting down regularly in a classical position, that's why I have the cutout on the bottom of my guitars. And how does it play standing up? And of course the overall silhouette is very important. We're so used to seeing certain silhouettes in guitars that you don't have to copy exactly, but that is familiar to most customers, and that's something you have to keep in mind. And personally, I don't like a lot of unused space on a guitar body. For example, I don't like it when the bridge is yeah, not even halfway on the body, and there's a whole lot of real estate on the back of the guitar that's not used for anything, only then dead weight, for example. So those are a couple of things I would keep in mind when designing unconventional guitar shapes. Is they should be pleasing to look at, and when you try to market your guitars, they should have some form of familiarity with well-known guitar shapes, and things you decide to change in comparison to those shapes should help with the playability and the comfort of the guitar. So yeah, those are a couple of pointers I can give you regarding this subject without turning it into a full lecture. So I hope this answer helped you somewhat. The next question comes in from Yuri Bossink. Got any tips for a micro 2x2 meters workshop, and how big is yours? Presumably my workshop. Well, my workshop is approximately 2 meters wide and just over 4 meters long, so twice the size as your shop. My tips for small workshops is keep them tidy and clean up after every job you do, even in between builds. When you're finished with squaring off your neck blank, clean up and store your tools. If you're done routing, clean up, store your router, etc. So be clean and be tidy. Get rid of everything you don't need in your shed for guitar building. If you have a dedicated shop to guitar building, get rid of everything else as much as possible. Store them anywhere else, get rid of them. Yeah, so you allow yourself to have as much space as you can. Also, your tools, have dedicated spots for your tools, and make sure when you're done working with them to place them back where they belong. Again, to keep your shop organized and tidy. When you have to work in a very small workspace, the most important thing, in my opinion, is to keep it as tidy as you can. Don't clutter it, and get rid of everything you don't need to practice guitar building. So that's my tip for you. Keep it tidy, keep it clean. The next question comes in from Clifford Evans. Hi Daniel, I love your builds. What was it that made you get into guitar building? Good question, and I really like to answer this one. As a small kid, I think 9, 10, 11 years old, I always wanted to build my own guitar. I didn't own any guitars. There are some photos of me as a baby with a guitar in my cradle, but at the time I didn't have a guitar, and I borrowed a book from the library, making instruments for kids, and then there was a chapter that explained how to make a single string electric guitar, and I really wanted to try it, and I went all around town to try and get stuff and information on how to do it. But yeah, because it was pre-internet, it didn't get far, and as a teenager I started drawing guitar designs, but at the time I didn't have any tools, any workspace or anything like that, so that dream died a little, except for restoring my first acoustic guitar. Just a couple of years ago I bought this house and I made this workshop in the garden, just a place to store my tools, because I was heavy into remodeling houses, doing plaster work, plumbing work, carpentry, and you name it. And I wanted a space where I could just tinker with wood and metal a bit. So I built this shed, and one half was supposed to be storage, and the other half was to be my workshop where I could tinker a bit. And just when I finished this shed and I had a workshop, one of my guitars, the neck came off of a copy SG, the neck came off. And so I thought, well, I now have the space, a little workshop, let me try and fix it. It's broken already, so I can't mess it up. And luckily for me, the repair went fine, and it's a fine playing instrument right now. But that rekindled the thought of making my own guitar, and I sat down with my wife and I said, well, I have a place to work now which I can close the door off behind me when I'm done or when the day ends. So yeah, why not challenge myself and see if I can build a guitar for me. Yeah, just to see if I could do it, basically. And it turned out I had some talent for guitar building. The first guitar, yeah, turned out great as a guitar just for me, but I wanted to see if I could improve myself, so I built a second one. I went on a course at Crimson Guitars to build my third. I came back, built my fourth, and here is where we are today. I have a fully outfitted workshop, a YouTube channel, and some guitars for sale. So yeah, it got a bit out of hand, but that's what started guitar building for me. It started at a very young age as a small kid, trying to copy a guitar from a children's book on how to make simple instruments, and yeah, it ended up where we are today. The next question came in from Peter de Zwart. It's a Dutch name, so it's easy to pronounce for me. Hi Daniel, are you satisfied with your current models like the Nessa, or do you plan on redesigning or changing anything in the future for whatever reason? Do you have plans for more custom designs in the future? Groeten uit Brabant. At the moment I'm very happy with the designs of both the Nessa and the Sonia guitars. And to be honest, the Nessa has gone through very small design iterations already to improve playability and to improve makeability. That's also something to consider when designing a guitar, if you can make it with the tools and the skills you have at that moment. As of new guitar models, yeah, I'm toying around with some ideas, but nothing really concrete yet, as I lack a bit of inspiration at the moment. But there will definitely be another Unquendor Guitars model in the future. Picadol also sent me a question. What is your top 3 favorite metal bands? That's a hard one. I don't listen to music often, especially these days when I'm not in the car a couple of hours a day. I hardly listen to any music. The times I used to listen to music was or in the car or here in the workshop, but in the workshop nowadays there's mostly a camera rolling, so there's no time usually to listen to music. And when I do listen to music, it's mostly one of those epic, symphonic or folk music playlists on or YouTube or Spotify. But there are 3 bands I have on my phone mostly all the time, and those are Amorphis, Epica and Nightwish. I'm just a sucker for symphonic type metal and folk metal. So yeah, those are my 3 bands that I can say are always in or always on my iPhone. A question came in all the way from Sydney, Australia, from Graham. Hi and good afternoon from Sydney. What is your opinion regarding graphite paint to form a Faraday shield in electric guitars, please? Or do you use copper sheeting or nothing at all? Well, this might be a bit of a controversial topic, much like Tonewood. To be honest, I don't know for sure, and when I don't know anything for sure, it's hard for me to say anything about it on YouTube, because I usually want to make sure I'm right, or I have a good founded opinion on something, or at least an opinion founding on fact, presumably, instead of bias. So it's hard for me to say something about this. Well, I have made guitars with and without using shielding paint, and to be honest, I haven't noticed any difference between guitars with or without shielding, mostly because I'm using humbuckers, and humbuckers are designed to prevent the 50 or 60 hertz hum cycle. And especially these days, and one of the reasons I started using active pickups is to prevent any noise. That's a great benefit of using active pickups. It just prevents noise even better than regular humbuckers. what I can say about shielding, especially shielding for low frequencies like the 50 and 60 Hz hum, coming from my experience in my day job as an electrical engineer, is that doing EMI shielding, whether it's in guitars or industrial equipment, is very, very hard to do. The tiniest gap, some frequencies can cross the tiniest gaps, and especially for these low frequencies, not only the electric conductivity of the shielding material comes into mind, but also its magnetic properties. And usually for those low frequencies you need good magnetic conductive properties of the shielding material, as well as have a sufficient thickness. And that's the problem with shielding guitars. We don't have any thickness at all, no matter if you're using shielding paint, copper or aluminum sheeting. Copper and aluminum and graphite shielding paint aren't magnetically conductive, and there's very little thickness. So in my experience as an engineer, I would say the things we do with shielding doesn't really matter, but because I can't prove it on guitars as of yet, I'm not sure. The only thing I can say, it doesn't hurt. And why I use graphite shielding paint is because it just looks great inside the cavity, and like I said, if it doesn't help, it certainly doesn't hurt to do so. So that's my opinion on shielding. Eli Salazar also sent me a question. Daniel, great work. What's your favorite wood to work with? Also, what are some of your favorite tools? Well, my favorite woods might not come as a big surprise. For guitar bodies, it's black limba. It's very easy to work. It's a very easy wood to work with. It sands fine, it shapes fine using files and rasps. It's easy to plane, and it gives a nice cut and a nice finish when you route it using a good quality router bit. And for necks, my main go-to wood type is maple for all the characteristics of maple. It's easy to shape without going too fast. It's hard enough so you can be nice and consistent with your cuts, and just an overall very good wood type for making necks. Some of my favorite tools, of course, my router table. I really love my router table. It can double as a workbench or as a presenter's desk like in most of my videos. So if you have a small workshop, I recommend making a big table on casters which you can roll around, that can act as a router table, as a workbench, as a desk or whatever, instead of getting a big workbench. But my absolute favorite tool in the workshop is my Incra protractor. You've seen me use it in many videos, but this is my absolute favorite tools. My absolute favorite tool here in the workshop. As simple as it is. And of course I like my Spindle Sander, my drill press, and my collection of chisels and Iwasaki carving files. But I think my router table and my Incra protractor are the most used tools here in the workshop, and I couldn't build guitars without them. Explicit also sent in a question. Have you tried polishing the aluminum inlays to a mirror finish? And yes, I did, but without any protective coating, in my experience, it didn't last very long due to the fact that aluminum oxidizes very quickly, which is a good thing because the oxidation layer on aluminum makes for a very durable and resilient surface coating, as it were. And on top of that, I also prefer the look of a matte aluminum over a very glossy and shiny polished surface. So I tend to keep them nice and matte looking. ABOUC sent in a question. Hi Daniel, I'd love to learn some tips on selecting and sourcing aluminum, brass or copper for inlays, nuts, control cavity covers, etc. In other words, are there specific grades of each metal Does one metal work better for some applications than others? Availability, affordability, consideration for workability and or strength, etc. Thanks. Well, this question seems like a topic for an entire video series, to be honest. So very hard to answer, but if you want my opinion, honestly, I don't think about it that much. I mostly use aluminum. I haven't used any brass or copper, etc. on a guitar build yet. I'm thinking about doing something with copper in the near future, but who knows. To be honest, I don't think about it that much. I always get what is easiest to get, and yeah, sourcing materials and price wise it might also depend on where you're from. Here in the Netherlands, as a non-business, we don't have that much choice other than to go online or go to our local hardware store or local do-it-yourself store and get these very cheap aluminum anodized strips and profiles, which turned out for me works best for my inlays. I got a sheet of industrial grade aluminum, but that's a lot softer and so to say than the cheap stuff is. And when working on an elaborate inlay like my Unquendor Guitars logo, I don't want it to easily bend when I'm cutting it out or when I'm sanding it or something like that. So I want it to be a bit more rigid, and these cheap anodized flat bars of aluminum from the local store tend to work better. Also when sanding, they don't give as much of a black, almost greasy like substance which the industrial grade aluminum does. I'm not entirely sure on the exact alloys, but yeah, my advice would be start with easy to get cheap stuff, and if it works for you, stick with it and experiment with all kinds of materials. So yeah, that would be my tip. Yeah, just try different stuff and try with cheap, easy to get stuff and go from there. Julian Suarez also sent in a question. I always had doubts about the cable that is placed in the bridge. What is the functionality of that? Thank you. I think you're referring to the grounding wire running from the bridge of a guitar to the control cavity, and why it's there. I can't answer this question to any satisfaction, I guess, in this video. I already tried to make 2 separate videos on this topic, but they were so complicated I didn't upload them to YouTube, because to really understand what's going on, you really need some knowledge of electrical engineering and the way power is distributed from the power plant through your home to the power outlet and into your amp and guitar, to know what's really happening. But the initial function of the little grounding wire to the guitar bridge was to prevent unwanted noise in the guitar circuitry. I've got my own opinion on whether or not to use this wire. I believe you shouldn't, because it's potentially unsafe. But to explain the reason why it's potentially unsafe, I would love to make a video on it. So if you like to know why, let me know, and I try to make a video on this topic for the 3rd time. The next question comes in from, and I hope I don't butcher your name, Wujik M, I believe it's pronounced. Is it okay to round the back of the neck first and then round a groove for the truss rod? You can do it, but I wouldn't recommend it. I always recommend to route the truss rod channel as soon as you can and only start carving the neck after the fretboard and the truss rod are installed. This helps to prevent any bowing or cupping of your entire neck when you remove a lot of material from the neck blank. Of course you could use some sort of jig and route in the truss rod channel afterwards, but I think it would be more of a hassle and there would be no benefit of doing it like that. Yeah, you could if you have to, but I wouldn't recommend doing it. A question from Mauricio Kemver. Hello, I same as you live in the Netherlands. I want to make my first guitar from scratch. I have already built several kit guitars and I do have basic electric tools including a router. I was wondering, before I ruin a nice slab of Tonewood, what wood can I use for my very first trial and where to go get it? Good job on the GGBO. Dankjewel, Mauricio. Well, Mauricio, I would recommend using something like ash, mahogany, or of course black limba. Those are all very nice woods to work with, not too hard to shape and to route, and usually not as expensive as well. Yeah, because you're in the Netherlands, I would recommend checking out Massave Fijnhouthandel in Zwolle. He's a really nice guy, has reasonable prices for very good quality woods, and yeah, I would recommend checking him out. For all non-Dutch viewers, which are the majority, yeah, the web shop I just mentioned, or the supplier, is a Dutch supplier only, I'm afraid. I know he ships to Belgium, but everything, his website and such, are in Dutch. So keep it in mind. I get this question asked often. Where do I get my wood? I get it from a Dutch supplier, and I always have a link to his website in the description. But keep in mind, it's a local Dutch supplier that usually doesn't ship internationally. So keep that in mind. But for Mauricio, yeah, use mahogany, black limba, or swamp ash, for example. Yeah, and my philosophy is always, when you take it slow and take a deep breath before you make your first cut, you should be all right. The next question is also about guitar wood, from Andrei Timoshenko. I think I pronounced that pretty well. Hello, I tried but didn't find any answer to this question. When you are making a guitar body out of two pieces of wood, is it necessary for the guitar center line to be exactly along the glue joint? Interesting question. Simple answer would be no. There's no reason why you should have the glue joint of the two halves of your body in the center line, but it makes your life a whole lot easier having a fixed center line. And also when you want to apply a non-opaque, so an oil finish or something that lets you see the natural grain of the wood, yeah, it would be very weird looking if, for example, the book match or the center line of the two halves, the glue joint of the two halves of the guitar body, wasn't exactly centered on the guitar, unless you came up with a design and made it into a design feature to have the glue joint off center of the rest of the body. But for most people, I think it would look a little bit unsettling, so to say. A lot of people with OCD wouldn't handle that pretty well, to be honest. That said, when you use an opaque finish, like a lacquer, a solid color finish, you can of course use two halves, and then it doesn't matter where the center line is. For example, a lot of cheaper guitars use 2, 3 or sometimes even 4 piece bodies, and the center line can be wherever you like it. It doesn't really matter. But when you don't have an opaque finish, I would recommend keep the glue joint and the center line of the guitar exactly the same. Jack Gucci also sent in a question regarding wood. Hi Daniel, can you speak on wood species for Tonewood? For example, maple over wenge or walnut over oak. I see many use alder over ash, etc. It would be good to know. This is another one of those questions I'm a bit uncomfortable on talking about or answering, and I can't really answer this question because of what I said earlier. I like to base my opinion and the things I teach here on YouTube, and I talk about here on YouTube, on proven fact, and preferably proven to me or by myself. And if there's one topic that's unproven over the years, it's the existence of Tonewood and whether or not different species of wood make a difference in the end result and the tone of your guitar. And I think it's a bit more complicated. It's not so much, if you think about it scientifically from a physics point of view, I think you can't assign certain properties to a certain species of wood. I prefer to look at it at the physical characteristics of a piece of wood regarding species, no matter what species. I think it has more to do with the density of that particular piece of wood, the grain structure in that particular piece of wood, the mass of that particular piece of wood. Even if you have two slabs, for example, of mahogany, most likely they're different, and because of these differences, even within the same species of wood, I think it's very hard to prove whether or not Tonewood is a real thing and whether or not you should talk or advise about it. My advice would be just to pick a wood type you like on your guitar based on looks, weight, or maybe your own personal preferences or experience in certain tonal characteristics in a certain species of wood, maybe from a certain supplier, etc. So I can't say Wenge on a alder top sounds like this, and Cerakote on a mahogany body should sound like this, and adding a flamed maple top to an ash body gives you this result, because I think it's different for every single piece of wood by itself. So yeah, my recommendation is just pick wood types you like. For example, my great guitar build-off build was specifically, I really fell in love with the Cerakote top, and I went for a blend or a subtle backing with an elder body, for example, because I like the contrast between these two wood types based on how they look and such. Yeah, rather than tone, because that is a hard topic to really know beforehand. If I combine these two woods, this would be my end result for this guitar. So I hope this answered your question somewhat. Yeah, it's I'm not a big believer in Tonewood by species. I believe in Tonewood by physical characteristics of a certain piece of wood. So now we get into the more technical questions. Next one is from Steve Maddock. He says, "Hi, I'm currently building my first electric. I'm installing a float Royce, and I realized that the neck at the 22nd / heel is a little narrow, measuring 50 millimeters approximately. I forgot about string spacing. It appears I might just get away with it. Any suggestions? Thanks." Well, this is a bit of a problem. I measured one of my guitars, and the string spacing of the strings themselves at the 22nd fret for a Floyd Rose tremolo on a scale length, I presumably 25.5, is approximately 50 millimeters. This would mean that the strings are just alongside the edge of your neck, and I don't know what the width of your nut is, presumably something along the ways of 42, 43 millimeters presumably. So yeah, having only a 50 millimeter wide neck at the 22nd fret is a bit of a problem. It needs to be around 55, 56 millimeters, somewhere in the range of that. Yeah, any fixes? I thought about this, and I thought about maybe adding a binding alongside the fretboard to give you an additional 1 millimeter at each side. Maybe if you do a double binding, you can get away with the required 2 to 2.5 millimeters at each side to get to the required 55 millimeter width at the 22nd fret. but that depends on whether or not your neck has already been shaped, and I presume it has. So adding binding would create a ridge, and then you have to round over the binding. So I think there isn't any easy solution to this problem, unfortunately. Yeah, and I don't know if you can get a Floyd Rose style bridge with smaller string spacing. So yeah, I'm afraid that you might have to make a new neck, unfortunately. Yeah, always take into account the string spacing and the angle of the strings along the entire neck. So starting with the knot width and then the bridge string spacing at your scale length. Yeah, when you're drawing your guitar, draw in the strings and add an additional 3 to 5 millimeters on each side of the string for the width of your fretboard. So yeah, I can't think of any easy, quick solution to fix a problem like that. And this brings us to the next question sent in by Marcelo Mendes. Marcelo says, "Hi Daniel, firstly I want to say thank you. Your videos are helping me a lot on a project I'm doing. So about guitar building, is there any mistake that is unfixable and how to avoid them? Cheers from Brazil." Well, as you have seen in my previous answer, making your neck too narrow to allow for the string spacing, for example, might be one of those unfixable mistakes. Same goes for cutting your fret slots in the wrong position, like I did, and ending up with too little material to cut all the fret slots. That would be an unfixable mistake, and you have to scrap the fretboard and start all over. But most other mistakes can be repaired or can be avoided. And yeah, how to avoid mistakes is, yeah, keep thinking about what you're doing, what you're trying to achieve, and what you need to do to achieve that goal you're trying to do. Yeah, that's my advice for almost everything, especially in guitar building. Keep thinking about what you need to do, what you're after, what's the goal you're trying to achieve, and keep thinking about if you're going about it the correct way and what the best way for you is to achieve your goals, so to say. So it's all, most of guitar building is all done up here. You have to translate what's going on here to your hands, and you have to keep thinking about it. And the first step would be make a good design, make a full scale drawing, whether it's on a piece of paper, an old roll of wallpaper, or in a computer using a CAD system, and study guitars and study what's needed in your guitar for the parts you're using. For example, coming back to the neck width, what's the width of your nut, what's the string spacing on your nut, what's the width of your bridge, and what's the string spacing on your bridge, what's your scale length. Draw in the two E strings, the high and the low E string, and add, for example, for your fretboard, an additional 3 to 5 millimeters on the sides of your strings to determine the width of your fretboard. And that's all has to do with what components am I using and what do I need to make them work on this guitar, and how do I go about achieving that goal. So it's avoiding mistakes is all up here in your mind. Keep thinking about what you're trying to achieve and how you're going about achieving it. So long answer for a very short question. On to the next one. And the final question for this episode comes from Sean Murphy. He asked me, "Hi Daniel, I really like your spindle sander with a fence trick for thickness sanding stock. However, I've tried it myself and tend to get a bit of a wavy pattern from the spindle going up and down. I've tried experimenting with the width of the gap to the fence and therefore how loose or tight the wood passes, but mostly still end up with a wavy pattern. Which grit sandpaper do you use, and any tips on how to get a smoother finish. Cheers! I use mostly the 80 or the 150 grit sanding drums for my spindle sander, and depending on the wood type, for example rosewood and ebony fretboards, I also tend to get a bit of a wavy pattern while sanding stock to thickness. However, I use this wavy pattern to my advantage, and by keeping an eye on the distance in between the waves, I can determine how consistent my feed through speed is, for example. With an oscillating spindle sander, there's nothing much you can do about these wavy patterns, and what I like to do as soon as I'm done thickness sanding my stock, I take a leveling beam with a 240, 120 or 240 grit sandpaper and just very easily remove those wavy patterns. They're not really dense, but just a scratch pattern that goes up and down. So there's nothing much you can do about it other than finalize your sanding by hand. So I hope this answered your question. I also received a lot of hard to explain technical questions, mostly regarding headstock break angles and neck break angles and string heights and setups and such. And those are too complex to answer in this Q&A, but I will mention the guys who send in a question so they know I've seen it, and I think I will make a different video about these questions in which I can explain more in depth what's going on with headstock break angles and neck break angles. For example, Gökhan from Turkey sent in a question, how deep do you route your neck pockets and do you always have a break angle at the neck? Rhoda van Dragoon sent in a question also about string height and how the break angle of the neck impacts string height at the bridge. XGC Polaris is working with a Floyd Rose, recessed Floyd Rose tremolo, has a question about an angled neck. Eric Giova, what's the ideal angle for a headstock and how do you calculate it? Another question from Sean Murphy also has a question about setups. Julian also had a question about fret bus and setups, and Phil Tetnell wanted to know how to determine the place of a tunematic bridge. Yeah, those are really questions that need a very detailed answer, and I will make another video that addresses these topics. So yeah, I hope you liked this video, and if you did, make sure to leave a like button. If you're not already subscribed, please consider doing so and hit that little notification bell so you get notified when I upload something new. So in the next video I might answer some of these more technical questions in more detail, or maybe do a review on my Bosch pillar drill, because I get a lot of questions about my pillar drill as well. So I'm not sure what I'm going to do yet. At the moment I don't have any builds, any guitar builds planned. I'm very busy making a lot of guitar straps. That's taking a lot of my time. So yeah, I'm not sure what I'm going to do for next week's video, but nonetheless, I hope to see you all there. But until then, have a nice week.